Okay, good evening, and welcome to the May 8th, 2013 meeting of the City of Lake Forest Plan Commission. I am Michael Lay. I'm chairman of the commission, and at this time I would like to introduce the members of the commission. To my right is Commissioner Culbertson. To my far left, Commissioner Kuchman, and right next to me is Commissioner Ziccarelli. From city staff, we have Ms. Zerniak here tonight with us as well. We have the agenda in front of us. The next item of business is recognition of former Plan Commission Chairman Jack Reisenberg, who's with us tonight. Jack served with distinction as both a member of the Plan Commission for 3 years from 2007 to 2010, and then as chairman since from 2010 to 2013. He has gone on to bigger and better things as a Third Ward alderman of the Lake Forest City Council. A lot happened during Jack's tenure on the commission. Notable among them were the approval of the master plan for Northwestern Lake Forest Hospital, the Woodlands Academy master plan, both the Phase 1 and the SUP. Last thing that he dealt with was the Westward Bistro and the 950 Whiskey Bar and the bicycle master plan. In addition to that, there were other developments and amendment code changes. Jack, welcome. I have a presentation for you. This is to Jack Reisenberg, Plan Commission, from the period of time we mentioned, both as chairman, and with gratitude and appreciation for your fine service to the city. Thank you. And we look forward to your continued service on the council. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And you may make a few remarks if you like. Thank you.
Well, gentlemen and Cassie, thank you. Thank you for honoring me. I must say the 7 years were a lot of fun. I truly enjoyed it. I don't think I've ever done anything that I enjoyed more, interestingly. And I mean that. I truly mean that. And then the last 3 years, when I had that gavel in my hand, was tremendous, I thought, and we accomplished a lot. I kind of started with the BERA before I had the opportunity to work with you guys, and then we ended with what I think was our signature project, which was the hospital, and I think that was significant. Yeah, it was clearly, I think, our signature event, and I must say I enjoyed working with you guys. You truly were professional. You helped us get through many tough situations. I believe we did it successfully, and I'm very proud of what we accomplished. And I wish you continued success. Ms. Zerniak, you were a real partner, and you were a lot of help. And you gave me great guidance, and I will miss working with you directly, now kind of indirectly being on the city council. But you were a real pro, and you were a tremendous help to me. And I say now with my parting remarks to you folks, make me proud. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jack. Good luck to you. Okay, our next item of business is introduction and preliminary discussion of an item permitting the use of coach houses and garage apartments as secondary residential units on properties zoned for single-family use. I would emphasize that no action is scheduled on this item at this time. I would like Before I proceed with this, however, to go back to item number 3, approval of the minutes of our April 10th, 2013 meeting. Thank you, Augie. Is there any corrections, additions, deletions, or modifications of any kind to the minutes as submitted? Seeing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion to approve the minutes is adopted. Okay, now we'll get back to item number 4. As I was saying, no action is scheduled on this item number 4 at this time. What we will have is a presentation by city staff, Ms. Zerniak. And before we proceed there, I would like to ask whether or not there's any declaration of conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts by members of the commission on this item.
No.
Seeing none, we will proceed. Kathy?
Thank you, Chairman Lay, members of the commission. In February of this year, Alderman Moore held the city's first community forum, community engagement forum. The idea for community forums came out of a recent strategic planning session that the City Council had, in which the discussion focused on other ways to get the community involved, not necessarily just when the Plan Commission, the City Council, Building Review Board are making a significant decision, but also to discuss issues on an ongoing basis. So the first community engagement forum focused on the topic of granny flats, although during that meeting there was a movement away from the term granny flats because people felt it was confusing and misrepresentative. So we're slowly making that transition from granny flats to coach houses and garage apartments. The discussion really came up as part of several discussions. One was recognition that there are some very large properties in Lake Forest that perhaps may not be selling as quickly as they have in the past, and many of those large properties have accessory structures on them. In the past, estates often had gardeners, chauffeurs, service help for the home, and those people often lived on the estate. Through the years, some of those estates have been subdivided, so some of those smaller structures are actually on their own lots, but some remain on a lot with the larger home. There was a recognition that those properties, these structures may have some historic significance, and there was also a recognition that this may be an opportunity to encourage use of a different housing type. I have just a few slides that I wanted to go through. Some accessory units have remained as rental units for decades. Those units were grandfathered into the code. In the 80s, the code was written to only allow a single residential unit on property zoned for single-family use. And that's really all of the R districts, R1, R2, R3, R4, and R5. Those properties are all different sizes. So we do have some situations where accessory units, coach houses, above garage apartments, are used as rental units, and those are considered legal, non-conforming, or grandfathered in. But other than that, if someone were to want to reconvert a coach house that perhaps is being used as storage to a rental unit, the code today would not permit that. Today, accessory units can be used as home offices, studios, exercise rooms. They can be used as a living unit for a family member, storage, playhouse, pool house. So the aspect that is currently not permitted by the code, again, is use of accessory structures for a second separate rental living unit on a single family property. As I mentioned, non-conforming uses exist today. came up with the term grandfathered granny flats, which are those that have been in use as a second residence for decades. But looking forward, these could be rental homes for teachers, for students, for employees working in Lake Forest, for smaller families. Caretakers and guest houses currently can be permitted by special use permit, but are not permitted outright because they fall into that second residential unit category. The question that was posed was simply, are there opportunities that we should be exploring to support preservation, to support the economic viability of these larger properties, and to support offering a diversity of housing sizes, housing types, and housing price points. And this is just an example of some different units that are out there. What you have in your packet after the February Community Engagement Forum, we prepared what we're calling a T form that we're going to try and use for subsequent community forums. And that literally is just during the community forum, we stood at the flip charts and we wrote down the ideas that were put out there. And we tried to have people think broadly about the positives and the negatives, or the opportunities or the challenges. So those are simply a summary of the ideas that were put forward that evening. That T form was presented by Alderman David Moore to the City Council, and he posed the question, should we do any follow-up on this? And the Council thought that this was worthy of further discussion, and that's why it is now before you. Again, tonight, just for preliminary discussion. If you choose to direct staff to move this forward, what we would do would be to take your comments, take thoughts that are put forward in the summary, and do a first draft of a possible code amendment that may open the door a little bit on these uses, or if you choose, open the door wider on these uses. In the write-up, you have, again, just some thoughts from staff about some parameters you might wish to put around this. So no action is requested tonight. The council simply asks that you study this, so your recommendation can be anything from, thank you very much for the information, we think it's a terrible idea, to let's explore it further. And if you choose to explore it further, we would go through a public hearing process, and you would see this again.
Okay.
I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Questions for Kathy?
Well, one comes to mind. Do we have any sense of what the current stock of this kind of housing there is in Lake Forest?
We do. We did a very rough count based on our geographic information system. We didn't narrow it down. So the count we came up with, about 180 units, but that is not broken down. Some of those might be pool houses, some of those might be units that don't necessarily fit this category. If you direct us to do so, we would further break that down. For instance, we could look at accessory units located within the historic district or located in certain zoning districts. Maybe you want us to look at the larger properties as opposed to the smaller. But just a guesstimate, we believe that maybe the units that would really fit this category are probably more in the range of 40, maybe up to 60.
And do you have any sense of what the occupancy rate is on these units?
We believe the existing occupancy rate is fairly low. Maybe over 10, maybe under 20. So it's a handful.
This could possibly present a rental opportunity with respect to maybe 40 or so potential units.
Again, those are
Rough.
gut feel numbers, and we could certainly hone those down if you direct us to do further work on this.
Right. I note that there's a suggestion in the staff report that the maybe we would include a condition where the accessory structure must have been constructed prior to a certain date. And then I notice among the concerns is that from the T paper, construction of new structures, there's, if that's allowed, it concerns of density and and the like could arise. Could you just elaborate a little bit on what the issues that were discussed and what maybe the city's position is on some of these thoughts?
Sure. At the community forum, I think it's fair to summarize the discussion as being the group was very interested in the concept of using accessory structures. At the same time, there was concern about would this mean that new accessory structures could be built, for instance, on small lots in the South Park neighborhood. So there was the full range of discussion. There certainly was concern about, there was I believe, a distinction between use of existing historic accessory units and really trying to make those properties more viable and building new. I think the support and the discussion really focused around the use, opening up the use for existing accessory structures. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes, in part. I'm wondering how a recommendation might come down the line whereby you try to confine or limit the number of potential structures that could ultimately be built. And I'm not sure if staff or anybody else has come up with some guidelines along that.
In your memo, we threw out some ideas. Again, we haven't studied this, we haven't prepared a formal recommendation, but for instance, if there was an interest in opening the door a little bit on this use, some of the parameters that could be used, perhaps as an initial step, this is just permitted within the areas already within a historic district, or perhaps, and it could be any or all of these, perhaps it's only permitted on properties over an acre or larger. Perhaps it's permitted only for structures that were constructed before a certain date. Perhaps it's permitted only for structures that meet current setbacks, either for accessory structures or principal residences. So in crafting this, it could have any kind of limitations. And I think it was even discussed that this might be something that gets put in place and then 3 years later, we evaluate it and say it's worked or it hasn't worked. And obviously, codes can always be amended.
Yeah, that does answer my question. Thank you. I just one more. I didn't quite understand one of the suggestions in the staff report. Accessory residential units must be located out of the required zoning setback inside or rear yards. Is outside of this setback, inside the setback?
Not within.
What it
Within
meant
the setback?
I'm not sure how it was written, but what it meant to say is that it should, that option would require that accessory units be located outside of
The setback.
the setback, within the buildable area.
Within the buildable area?
Yes,
Okay.
must not
Outside
encroach into the
right,
setbacks.
Okay. Understood. Thank you very much.
Sure. Augie?
Yeah, maybe just a couple. Kathy, I think one of the things that I would look at if we go further with it, and maybe this is a question, maybe a recommendation if it doesn't exist, about a precise definition of what makes up a garage apartment, and maybe definition in terms of, does it need to be detached from the main structure? Does it need to be above grade? I would think probably yes. Is there a maximum square footage? So maybe kind of honing in on a definition so that as you start looking at the different conditions, you say, okay, is this really one of those structures or is it not? And I think that would be important, kind of as a good first step. Secondly, if a lot of them are above garages, and I don't know that this is the Plan Commission role or maybe Building Review Board or Code Commission in terms of ventilation, fire alarm, I think that needs to be considered somewhere in the whole public process. And then the third is just a question. The forums, the community forums, did they have a lot of participation? In other words, is there a lot of support for this Or is it an idea that we're just kind of getting out in front of, that should a condition come up, we want to be out in front of it?
At the very first community forum, which focused on this issue, we had about 35 people attend. There was a follow-up. There was each alderman is taking on a community forum, so there will be, I think, 8
Right.
through the year. We had one the evening of the very heavy rain. We had one on a variety of housing types, where we talked about ownership, rentals, what housing types do we have enough of, which would you never build again. That was hosted by Alderman Pandeleon, and we had a smaller number, about 15, 20. There's a community forum coming up next Thursday on native plantings. There's one scheduled almost every month. There's one to discuss recycling, I think water conservation and water uses. So they're just not focused on development issues, but really focused on the interests of interest areas of the aldermen. And some may not result in any action, but just prompt a community discussion. So that's all it's meant to do, is to provide another forum other than being in this room in a formal setting.
So on this one in particular, there were like 35 pros and cons listed, which kind of leads me to believe there's a lot of discussion about it.
There was.
So there was a lot of interest on it? Okay.
It was from a planning perspective, planners love that kind of stuff. It was very interactive, and I think everyone left feeling very good. And it was interesting. Some people asked why we didn't televise it, and we actually polled the group, and they said, this is good, we don't want it televised. We also didn't require them to sign in or commit in any way. Some people stood up and said, I'm so-and-so, and others just spoke. And when we asked for feedback, people liked that informal opportunity to comment. So far they've worked well. We'll see.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay. Kathy, I just had one question too on the possible concepts that you had listed. The third from the last outlines it states the number of accessory units on any property is limited to a total of units as specified in the code. Can you elaborate as to what that means?
Again, that was just a thought. Maybe if you permit this use, there might be a home that has that historically had a garage apartment, had a gardener's cottage, and had a coach house. And maybe you want to say a single property can only have one accessory residential unit or two. I know that isn't written very well. There isn't already something in the code that specifies that. It was just an idea that you might want to pursue.
So limited by number, say as a proportion, or corresponding to acres or what have you.
Whatever you can come up with.
Okay. I would just, well, I'll hold my comments for later, but other than to say I attended that session, and it was a lot of very creative, participative energy at that meeting. There were some people there who were obviously very much in favor of this from a historical preservation standpoint, but then so that the meeting didn't get too far going in one direction or another, the question was asked, well, what kind of concerns would you expect to hear from the citizenry about this? And that's where these concern listing came out of that. So I thought it was a very balanced, creative, energetic discussion, frankly. And it went on for probably, what, an hour and a half? So it was very good discussion. There's obviously some people who are staunch proponents of this, but their enthusiasm was tempered by people saying, hey, wait a minute, let's make sure. And I think that's where Kathy, from that, distilled some of these concepts that would, if we do proceed, would need to be considered. So I would just ask, is there any member of the commission who feels that we should not proceed any further with this? Okay. Seeing then,
Is there code that already covers this topic?
The code as currently written allows one residential unit on property zoned for single-family use. The only exception is those units that have been occupied for
Right.
decades and they're grapfathered in.
Okay, got it.
I would
So you
just
can
add, you
live
might
there and
want to,
store in your house.
Yes. What were you saying?
you could invite public comment before you conclude.
Yes. Right. At this time, I would ask, is there anybody here that would like to comment on this? Okay, seeing none. What is the pleasure of the commission regarding any directions we may want to give to staff on this matter?
Well, I would move that we direct staff to prepare code language for the commission to consider through a public hearing process as it relates to coach house and garage apartments.
Second.
Second? Okay. Are there any other suggested concepts from the commission in addition to those listed in our report that anyone wishes to mention to Kathy, other than what, Augie, you've already mentioned?
Thank you. No,
Okay.
thank you.
General direction of her recommendations or intended recommendations are right.
Are you ready for the
what we
question?
should be discussing.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next item before us is a public hearing and action on consideration of an amendment to the zoning code, section 46-24, and other sections as appropriate, to establish a review process for requests to extend private roads outside of the city limits. Are there any declaration of conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts by members of the commission on this item? Seeing none. Kathy, would you like to provide a presentation, please?
Thank you, Chairman Lay, members of the commission. On an ongoing basis, city staff works with the city attorney to review our code and identify any gaps, any areas that need to be clarified, any areas where a process isn't in place for review. In a recent review, we identified that currently there is not a process, a public process at the city level that would be undertaken if there were development, for instance, residential development that occurred just outside the city in unincorporated area and was under the control of either the county or another municipality. There's no city review process. We would have the opportunity to send a comment to the county, but there would be no public hearing, no plan commission deliberation, no city council deliberation. So at the suggestion of the city attorney, we brought this gap to the attention of the city council, and at a recent meeting, the city council passed a resolution which was included in your packet asking the plan commission to consider this matter. It would simply be a proactive step of establishing a process in the code for review of any request to extend access outside the city limits to serve a use or development, extend access from any property inside the city limits to serve a use or development outside the city limits. What is proposed is that there is already a long list of special uses in the code. Those special uses either come before the Plan Commission or the Zoning Board of Appeals, depending on the type. And we would just suggest that you add language to that existing section that says in all zoning districts, and it's on page 3 of your staff report, we propose that you consider a recommendation on the following language. In all zoning districts, a special use permit shall be required to allow any portion of properties in the city of Lake Forest to be used as a means of access to uses or development outside of the corporate boundaries of the city. It's not making a judgment about whether or not something would be approved, but simply putting something in place so if this proposal was made, that there would be an opportunity for the Plan Commission to hold a public hearing, understand what was proposed, and then it will be judged on, and I did list the existing special use criteria, but those speak to compatibility and traffic congestion and property values. So it would be similar, it would be part of an existing process, but would just ensure that we have an opportunity to review any proposal of this type. Not something we expect to happen often and may never happen. So it's really just a caution to put a process in place. So if you choose to do so, staff recommendation would be that you forward a recommendation to the City Council in support of this code amendment. Be happy to answer any questions.
Questions of Ms. Zerniak? Joe?
I'll get started. If you have an improvement to a piece of property is contemplated, it's going to require a review of some body in Lake Forest today, regardless of whether it provides ingress or egress or access to an outside property, correct?
If there's development inside the city limits,
Right.
yes, it would.
So why,
If
I'm
there was
losing the
development,
relevance of the,
for instance, if there was a residential development that was proposed just outside the city limits,
Right.
In an area that's under the jurisdiction of the county, and that new development could only be served and connected to public roads by extending a road back into Lake Forest, that might put demands on city services, it might impact the character of the adjacent neighborhood. So it's the same kind of questions we would ask if we were looking at a subdivision or a development within the city boundaries.
no, I understand, I just, don't we already have a review and approval process in place for, because, again, if they're accessing land that already exists inside our city, we have the ability to review any and all improvements to that land that fall outside of, so.
If, for instance, a private road was just being extended and there was no development inside the city, the county would ask us for comments. But if no development was occurring in the city, that right now there isn't anything in the code unless someone's coming in to rezone property within the city limits, to subdivide property in the city limits, or develop it. We don't have a review process in place. So this is just filling that gap if something unusual happened.
Further questions of Kathy? I have one. Kathy, let's assume a situation where something was just outside the city but adjacent to a residential area. Under the current zoning code, if there was, somebody came in and said, we want to put a road through city-owned property to get to the area just immediately adjacent to a single-family area. Under the current zoning code, really the people living adjacent to that would have no say before the city council. Is that right?
Correct.
They would have to deal only with whatever other body had jurisdiction,
Correct.
whether it be the county or the water and sewer district or something like that.
That's correct.
Okay. So really, what this does is gives city residents some protections that at least there would be a review process that the Plan Commission and the City Council would participate in terms of that any deliberation of, really it's a hypothetical at this stage.
But a roadway would be considered an improvement, correct?
Yeah,
So if I sit on a piece of property inside the city limits, adjoining something outside the city limits, and I decide I want to put a road that will connect to the outside, I still need to seek approval today.
If someone owned a property that backed up to Bannockburn and they wanted to extend their driveway all the way through their property, you're right, we would issue a permit for that driveway.
You'd deny the permit if you didn't want to have access to Bannockburn.
But our driveway criteria speak to looking at at drainage.
Primary access point, probably. That's, I would think, I mean,
A driveway permit wouldn't get into necessarily the use. It's not a clear, I think that's why this was brought up, because there's some question. There wouldn't be a public review process, a public hearing wouldn't be necessitated, and we wouldn't necessarily, again, it's kind of hypothetical. It's looking at putting a process in place proactively, and I think other communities have experienced, and maybe other communities are more vulnerable if they're in different areas. We obviously have the lake to the east, so nothing's happening there. But I think based on experiences of other communities that developments that are immediately adjacent have in some cases put demands on city services or have added traffic on roads that weren't necessarily anticipated to have higher levels of traffic, and there hasn't been a public hearing at the local level. It's been held in a different jurisdiction.
So, I'm sorry, Mike.
It's okay.
If I understand right, Kathy, what you're saying is if someone were to come in, to use the driveway example, wanting to extend their driveway, they'd apply for a permit. The permit at a staff level would be reviewed, and the things that would be addressed would be drainage, pavement profile, thickness, all that kind of stuff. But there really isn't a public review process to say, can I do it? In other words, there's nothing stopping anyone from getting that driveway extension permit as long as they construct it to the city code requirements. And what I think you're saying is this would then move it from a staff level to a public level as part of that request. So it gets more involved than just simply a permit and build it this thick and this wide and so on and so forth. Now there's the question of, is the zoning proper to have this driveway go all the way through the back of my property? Is that what we're looking for? Putting up.
Yes.
Okay. And we currently, for the example of the driveway being extended, we currently don't have that, or it's not as clear. And so you want to put a place card in place to say specifically for extensions of private roads that requires a public process.
Correct.
Okay.
I have a question. Under state of Illinois law, does a home rule community have any extraterritorial regulatory control just beyond the borders of the city?
I can't specifically answer that question,
Okay.
but I did review this matter with the city attorney, and it's on his advice that
Okay.
this was brought forward to the city council.
Okay, thank you.
if I may, just.
Sure.
Kathy, I'm sorry. Outside of materials, thickness, safety issues, is the actual placement of the driveway under consideration by whomever would grant the permit to construct a driveway?
The driveways are not limited by zoning setbacks. Driveways can be within zoning setbacks. There is a specific limit on the number of curb cuts on a single frontage. If you have a circular driveway, it needs to be a certain distance apart. But no, other than that, we do not have, for instance, an impervious surface limit. So that wouldn't give us leverage to say, no, you're already at 30% or 50%, so you can't extend your driveway. So at least as we've thought about it, in a case where someone came in and asked for a driveway extension permit, at least as we've reviewed the code, we don't see anything that would clearly allow us to say, no, because we don't want to serve that use. So this would at least allow the questions to be asked. And it's a proactive measure more than anything else.
Any further discussion on the question?
Thank you.
A motion would be in order to basically recommend the language on page 3 under recommendation that's in italics, Kathy?
That's correct.
Okay.
I'll move that we recommend a code amendment to the City Council to amend Chapter 46, Section 24 to include the language that you just identified, Mr. Chairman. That would be my motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion on the question. Seeing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Okay. Item number 6, public testimony on non-agenda items. Is there anybody present who would like to provide public testimony on any matter that did not come before us this evening? Seeing none, we'll close that item. Any additional information, Kathy?
I just want to remind you that we will be polling for a workshop date in June, and you should have your vacancy filled, and you'll have a full 7-member commission by that time.
Good. Thank you. Seeing no other business to come, any other comments, any questions, comments, or anything by the members? Seeing none, we will stand adjourned. Thank you.